Hello, how are you? We are reading The Eagle by Rosemary Sutcliff. We are in chapter 16. We just finished chapter 15 where Marcus and Eska made it safely. They got the eagle, they whisked it away, they hid it underwater in a little crevice and then snuck all the way back to camp and made it just before dawn, and only one person was like, "Who is it?" And Marcus was just like, "It's me." The horse was upset. And then they all went back to sleep until shortly thereafter when morning came. And here we go. Chapter 16, The Ring Brooch. Excuse me. Let me start with some water. Sorry. Okay. If I had an editor, I could hire them to edit that out. Just kidding. Okay. A few hours later, Marcus and Eska took their leave of the dun of the village and started out, riding through a world that was clear washed and as deeply colored as a purple grape, after the thunderstorm which had finally broken over them at dawn. Now wait, do they have the eagle with them? No, they don't. Listen carefully and see what their plan is. Southward they went at first, following the shores of the loch, the lake, to its foot, to the base of like where the lake is, on the map, not like the bottom of the lake, of like south, right? The foot of the loch, then northeast by a herding path through the mountains that brought them down toward evening to the shores of another loch, a long sea loch this time. Now a sea loch, remember I talked briefly the last time, sometimes a lake, typically we say lake isn't like a freshwater lake, but these can be basically connected to the ocean, but it's just a little bit of ocean water that's coming, and most of it is covered by land, but it's still salt water. So a long sea loch this time, loud with the crying of shore birds. That night they slept in a village that was no more than a cluster of turf bothies clinging to the narrow shore between the mountains and the gray water. And next morning set out again for the head of the loch, where there was a village through which they had passed before. All that day they rode easily, breathing the horses often, giving them breaks. Marcus was eager to be out of this land of sea lochs, through which one had to zigzag like a snipe, in which one could so easily become trapped and entangled, but it was no good getting too far from the place of life before the next move in the game could be played. What game are they playing? Not Monopoly, it's a game with really their lives at risk. The loss of the eagle would have been discovered at midnight. So they left dawn, right, the morning after they stole the eagle, and now it's been another day. So the loss of the eagle would have been discovered at midnight, okay, the following day, when the priests went to renew the offering, and suspicion, though it would be widespread over all outside the tribe who had gathered to the feast of the new spears, would certainly fall most heavily on himself and Eska, right? Because they left right after the eagle went missing, so of course they would be suspicious of them, these outsiders. So they knew they would be suspicious of them. So the tribe would be up and after them before long now. Long before now. Knowing the way that they had taken, Marcus reckoned that their pursuers could be up with them not long after noon if they crossed the loch by coracle and commandeered ponies on the near shore, as they undoubtedly would do. But he had forgotten to allow for the difficulties of the few mountain passes, and it was much later than he had expected when at last his ear caught the soft drumming of unshod hooves a long way off. Because remember, they had a whole day start. But they kind of took their time because they knew they were waiting for them to catch up to them. Why are they waiting for them to catch up to them? Well, we'll see. And looking back, he saw a ragged skein of 6 or 7 horsemen coming at breakneck speed down a steep side glen toward them. Remember, a glen is a valley, so they're racing at breakneck speed toward them down the hill to where they are in the valley. He drew a quick breath that was almost of relief, for it had been a nerve-wracking business waiting for them, so he knew they were coming. "Here they come at last," he said to Eska, and then as a distant yell echoed down the mountainside, "Hear how the hounds give tongue." Eska laughed quietly, his eyes bright with the excitement of danger. "Swift, swift," he encouraged them softly. "Did we ride on, or rein in and wait for them? Rein in and wait, Marcus decided. They will know that we have seen them. They wheeled the mares and sat waiting while the skein of wild riders swept toward them. The ponies sure-footed as goats among the rocks of the steep glen. Mithras, what cavalry they would make, Marcus said, watching them. Of course, he's thinking about Roman military. Okay, can't help it. Vespania was uneasy. She fidgeted and sidestepped, blowing down her nose. Her ears pricked forward, and he patted her neck reassuringly. The tribesmen had reached the low ground now and swung into the long curve of the lochside, and a few moments later they were up with the two who waited for them, and reining back their ponies in full gallop, dropped to the ground. Marcus looked them over as they crowded in on him. 7 warriors of the tribe, Durgian, the chief, and his brother, what is his name? Liathan. Durgian and his brother among them. He took in their ugly looks, not as in like they look ugly, like they are angry, they're, upset, and the war spears they carried, and his face was puzzled and inquiring. Durgian? Liathan? What is it you want with me in so much haste? He's just acting completely innocent. You know well enough what it is we want with you, Durgian said. His face was set like stone, and his hand tightened on the shaft of his spear. But I fear that I do not, Marcus said in a tone of rising annoyance, pretending not to notice that the 2 of the tribesmen, leaving their own mount standing, had gone to Vespania's and Mina's heads. You will have to tell me. Yes, we will tell you, an older hunter cut in. We come to take back the winged god, also for blood, to wash out the insult that you have put upon us and upon the gods of our tribe. What does he mean by for blood? Their blood, their lives. He's saying, you stole our god, and not only do we want it back, we want vengeance for it. Basically with your lives. The others broke into a threatening outcry, pressing in on the 2 who had by now dismounted also. Marcus faced them with a pucker of bewilderment between his black brows. The winged god? He repeated. The eagle god that we saw carried at the new Feast of New Spears? Why light seemed to dawn on him. You mean that you have lost it? We mean that it is stolen, and we are come to take it back from those who robbed us, Durgian said very softly, and the softness was as though a cold finger gently stroked Marcus's spine, so very menacing, very creepy, like he's upset. He looked into the other's face with slowly widening eyes. And it must needs be I who stole it, he said, and then flared out at them. Why in the name of the thunder should I want a wingless Roman eagle? You might have had your reasons, said the chieftain in the same soft voice. I cannot think of any. The tribesmen were growing impatient. There were shouts of kill, kill, and they crowded closer. Fierce, rage-darkened faces were thrust into Marcus's, and a spear was shaken before his eyes. Kill the thieves. There's been enough of talking. Startled by the angry turmoil, Vespania was flinging this way and that, showing the whites of her eyes. And Minna squealed, going up in a rearing turn as she tried to break from the man who held her, and was forced down again by a blow between the ears. Oh my gosh. Marcus raised his voice above the tumult. Is it the custom of the Seal people to hunt down and slay those who have been their guests? Well do the Romans call the men of the north barbarians. Ooh, he just shot them an insult indeed. The shouting sank to a sullen, menacing mutter, and he went on more quietly. If you are so sure that we have stolen the Red Crest's god, the Romans' god, you have but to search our gear, and you will surely find it. Search then. The muttering grew fiercer, and Liathan had already turned to Eska's mare, stretching out his hand to the fastening of the pack. He's like, by all means, search us, if you're so insistent, if you're sure that you'll find it. Liathan, the brother. The muttering grew Liathan already turned to Eska's mare. Marcus moved distastefully aside and stood watching. Eska's hand tightened for an instant on the shaft of his spear, as though he longed to use it. Then he shrugged and swung away to join Marcus. Together they watched. Their few possessions tumbled on the grass. A couple of cloaks, a cooking pot, some strips of smoked deer meat flung out with rough haste. The lid of the bronze medicine box was wrenched back, and one of the hunters began to rummage inside like a little dog after a rat. Marcus said quietly to the chieftain, who stood beside him with folded arms, also looking on, "Will you bid your hounds be less rough with the tools of my trade? It may be that there are still sore eyes in the albu, though your small son's eyes are well." So he's reminding him of what he's done. Durgian flushed at the reminder and glanced aside at him for an instant with a kind of sullen half-shame. Then he spoke sharply to the man who was delving among the salves. "Softly, you fool. There is no need that you should break the medicine sticks." The man growled, but handled the things more carefully thereafter. Meanwhile, the others had unfolded and shaken out the sheepskin saddle pads, and all but torn the bronze ring brooch out of a violet-colored cloak by their rough handling. So if you remember, Marcus has had a brooch in the bronze in the shape of a ring that kind of, I don't know if you've seen like old movie like Lord of the Rings or whatever, but you know, when you're wearing cloaks, a lot of times you'll have some sort of something like a button or a brooch to connect it here, and then and then you have the hood back here. So he has this brooch on a violet colored cloak. Remember, it's the name of the chapter, so it's probably gonna be important. "Are you satisfied now?" Marcus asked, when everything had been turned inside out, and the tribesmen stood about, baffled and empty-handed, staring down at the chaos they had made. "Or is it that you would search us to the skin?" He held out his arms, and their eyes ran over Eska. It was perfectly obvious that they could have nothing a tenth the size and the weight of the eagle hidden on them. Remember, the eagle is like this big thing, okay? So it would be very clear if they had this huge piece of metal on their person. So it's like, "Do you want to search us?" And they're like, "Okay, obviously there's not something tenth the size of that on you." The chieftain shook his head. "We must cast our net wider, it seems." The tribesmen were all known to Marcus, at least by sight. They looked bewildered, sullen, and a little shamed, and they found it hard to meet his eyes, because they had accused him so aggressively of this thing, and they're like, "Ah, man, I guess he didn't do it. Sorry, bud." At a gesture from the chieftain, they began to gather up the scattered objects and bundle them, with the torn cloak with its dangling ring brooch so the cloak has been torn. With the dangling ring brooch into the pack cloth. Leviathan stooped to the disemboweled medicine box, glanced up at Marcus, and then away again. Again, a sign of like being a little bit ashamed. They had offended against their own laws of hospitality. They had hunted down two who had been their guests and not found the winged god after all. Come back with us," said the chieftain. "Come back with us, lest our hearts be shamed. Our hearts are shamed." Marcus shook his head. "We are for the south before the year closes in. Go and cast your net wider for this winged god of yours. We shall remember that we have been your guests, you and I." So he's kind of saying, "I forgive you. We'll remember the good parts." He smiled. "The rest we have already forgotten. Good hunting to you on the game trails this winter." When the tribesmen had whistled up their own ponies, who had stood quietly by all this time, with their reins over their heads, and remounting set off back the way they had come, Marcus did not move at once. He stood gazing after the dwindling specks up the glen with a queer regret, while his hand mechanically soothed and fondled his upset and angry mare. "Do you wish the eagle yet in the place we took it from?" Eska asked. So he's saying, like, do you regret taking the eagle? Marcus was still watching those dwindling specks, almost out of sight now, so they're almost gone. "No," he said, "if it were yet in the place we took it from, it would be still a danger to the frontier, a danger to other legions." So remember, if they left the eagle with the tribesmen, it would still be in great danger of being a rallying point for all the tribes to come up against Rome, right? It would be it would just give them a lot of reason to all come together and be unified, and, you know, give them a lot of, like, hoorah. "Also, it was my father's eagle, and none of theirs. Let them keep it if they can." Again, that almost challenge. "Only it is in my heart that I wish we need not have made Durgian and his sword brethren ashamed." He's like, I just wish we didn't have to make them feel ashamed of what, you know, they did. But he's also saying, it's still mine. Like, it's my father's. It's not actually theirs. They saw to their gear, tightened the pony's belly straps, and rode on. Presently, the lake, began to narrow, and the mountains to crowd in on it, rising almost sheer from the water's edge. So they're saying there's not a lot of space between the lake and the mountain going up. It's getting closer and closer. And at last they caught sight of the village, the distant huddle of turf bothies at the head of the loch, cattle grazing up the steep glen behind, and the straight blue smoke of cooking fires, rising pale against the somber browns and purples of the mountains that towered above them. It is time that I sickened. It is time. I keep forgetting to use Eska's language. Accent. It is time that I sickened of the fever, said Eska, and without more ado he began to sway from side to side, his eyes half closed. My head, he croaked, my head is on fire. Marcus reached out and took the reins from him. Slump a little more and roll a little less. It is fever, not metheglin, not wine, that lit the fire, remember, he directed, beginning to lead the other horses with his own. The usual crowd of men and women, children and boys gathered to meet them as they entered the village, and here and there people called out a greeting to them, glad in their remote way to see them back again. With Eska slumped over Mina's neck beside him, Marcus singled out the ancient headman, greeted him with the due courtesy, and explained that his servant was sick and must rest a few days, 2 days, 3 at the most. It was an old sickness that returned from time to time and would last no longer given proper treatment. So he's sick. It's not contagious. But we just need like 2 or 3 days and then we'll be fine. The headman replied that they were welcome to share his fireside, as they might have done when they passed that way before. But to that, Marcus shook his head. They're coming up with ways so that they can be away from everyone, is what you'll see. Give us some place to ourselves. It matters not how rough, so long as it will keep us out of the weather. Let it be as far from your living huts as may be. The sickness, it's funny the reason he gives, the sickness of my servant is caused by devils in his belly, and to drive them out it is needful that I use strong magic. He paused and looked round at the questioning faces. Oh, it will do no harm to this village, but it cannot be looked upon safely by any who have not the signs for protection. Obviously they wouldn't use that, but that is why we must have lodging apart from the living huts. They looked at each other. It's always dangerous to look upon forbidden things, said a woman, accepting the story without surprise. There could be no questioning of refusing them shelter. Marcus knew the laws of the tribes. They talked the matter over quickly among themselves and finally decided that Khan's cow byre, which was not now in use, would be the best place. So he's kind of preying on the fact that he knows these people are a little superstitious. He knows they also really value hospitality, and that he probably helped people with the whole eye situation beforehand. So they're using all these things to get the setup that they need. And you might be asking why. Well, you'll see in a little bit. Khan's cow byre proved to be the useful turf bothy, exactly like the living hut, save that it was not set so far below ground level, and there was no hearth in the center of the trampled earthen floor. It was well away from the main rath, or the main area of homes, with its doorway at an angle that would make it possible to slip out and in without showing up too clearly to any watching among the living huts. So far, so good. The villagers, feeling perhaps that a man who could conjure out devils was best treated kindly, did their best for the 2 returned strangers, and by dusk the mares had been taken in charge. Fresh fern, you know what a fern is? So the greenery from ferns that horses can presumably eat. Fresh fern stacked inside the hut for bedding. Oh, just kidding, for bedding. An old skin rug skewered up over the doorway to give kind of a doorway of a skin, like a deer or something. And the women had brought broiled boar's flesh for Marcus and warm ewe's milk for Eska, who lay on the piled bracken, moaning and babbling most realistically. Oh, I'm so sick. Later, with the deerskin rug drawn close over the door and the villagers crowded about their own hearths with faces and thoughts carefully turned from the outlying bothy and the magic that would be a-making there, Marcus and Eska looked at each other by the faint light of a floating reed wick and a shell of rancid seed oil. Oops. Eska had eaten the lion's share of the meat, for he would need it most, and now, with a few strips of smoked bear meat thrust into the middle, a rolled-up cloak, he stood ready to go. At the last moment, Marcus said savagely, "Oh, curse this leg of mine. It should be me going back, not you." Interesting. The other shook his head. "That leg of yours makes no difference. If it were as sound as mine, still it would be better, quicker, and safer that I should go. You could not leave this place and return to it in the dark without rousing the dogs, but I can. You could not find your way through the passes that we have traversed only once before. It is work for a hunter born and bred, not a soldier who has learned a little forest craft." Remember, so Eska, being a hunter, has learned to mark things out. Like, you know the trick of like moss always grows, I think, to the north or something. Things like that. Learning all these things, being trained in a way to kind of learn your path and where you're going and how to get back. He's saying, you wouldn't stand a chance. You weren't trained in this, I was. And this is my homeland. And he reached up to the little singing lamp hanging from the roof tree and pinched it out. Marcus drew back a fold of the rug and peered out into the soft darkness of the mountains. Away to the right, a solitary glint of gold shone from the chink in the deerskin apron over a distant doorway. The moon was behind the mountains, and the water of the loch were only a lesser darkness, without spark or luster. "All is clear," he said. "You are sure you can find the way?" "Yes." "Good hunting, then, Eska." A dark shadow slipped past him and was gone into the night. And he, Marcus, was alone. He stood for a while in the bothy doorway, ears stretched for any sound to break the silence of the mountains, but heard only the wet whisper of falling water where the swift stream came tumbling into the loch, and a long while later the bellying of a deer. When he was sure that Eska had got clear away, he dropped the rug. He did not relight the lamp, but sat for a long time on the piled bracken in the pitchy darkness, with his arms across his knees, thinking. His one comfort was the sure knowledge that if Eska ran into trouble, he himself would very soon share it. As in, if Eska gets in trouble, they'll be coming after him soon too. For 3 nights and 2 days, Marcus kept guard over an empty hut. Twice a day, one of the women, with face averted, would bring him boiled meat and fresh ewe milk, sometimes herrings, once a golden lump of wild honeycomb, and set them on a flat stone a little way off, and Marcus would collect them and later take back the empty bowls. Nice. After the first day, there were only women and children in the village. Evidently, the men had gone to answer some call from the dun. He wondered whether he ought to provide noises for the benefit of the village, but decided that silence would probably be more effective. So save for a little muttering and moaning when he thought someone was near enough to hear, just enough to keep it in their mind that there were 2 people in the bothy, he remained silent. He slept when he could, but he did not dare to sleep much, for the fear that trouble should blow up suddenly when he was not on the alert for it. Most of his time, day or night, was spent sitting just within the doorway, watching through a back-drawn chink in the rug the gray waters of the loch and the sheer boulder-strewn upward thrust of the mountains, towering so high above him that he had to tip his head far back to see their jagged crests where the mist rags trailed among the peaks and the high corries, so where the clouds are trailing among the peaks of the mountains. Autumn had come to the mountains almost overnight, he thought. A few days ago, summer had still lingered, though the heather was past its flowering. Remember, heather is purple flowers, but after, it's past its flowering. So now all the purple flowers are turned to brown, but there's still a lot of it. And the flaming rowan berries long since gone. But now it was the fall of the leaf. One could smell it in the wind. I love the smell of fall. And the trees of the glen grew bare, and the brawling stream ran gold with yellow birch leaves. Oh, sounds beautiful. Excuse me. Some while ago, after moonset on the 3rd night, without any warning, a hand brushed across the skin rug at the entrance, and as Marcus tensed in the close darkness, he heard the faintest ghost of a whistle, the broken 2-note whistle that they had always used to summon Cub. A sudden wave of relief broke over him, and he echoed the whistle. The rug was drawn aside, and a black shape slipped through. "Is it well?" Eska whispered. "It is well," Marcus returned, striking flint and steel to kindle the lamp. "And with you, how went the hunting?" "The hunting was good." Eska said as the tiny flame sprang up and steadied, and he stood and set down something closely bundled in the cloak. Marcus looked at it. Was there any trouble? None, save that it pulled the bank down a little and landing with the eagle. It must have been rotten, I suppose, but there is nothing in a bank slip to set anyone thinking. He sat down wearily. Is there anything to eat? Marcus had made a habit of saving each meal that he was given and eating it only when the next one came, so that he always had a meal in hand, packed into the old cooking pot. He produced it now and sat with his hand resting on the bundle that meant so much to him, while he watched the other eat, and listened to the story of the last 3 days told in low snatches between mouthfuls. Eska had cut back across the mountains without much difficulty, but by the time he reached the Loch of Many Islets, it had been near to dawn, and when he had to lie up, in the dense hazel woods through the day. Twice during the day, parties of warriors had passed close to his hiding place, carrying coracles and evidently bound, like himself, for the dun by the short way across the loch. Also, they had been carrying war spears, he said. As soon as it was dark, he had set out once again to swim the loch. It was little more than a mile across at the place he chose, and that too had not been difficult. My goodness, swimming a mile, not difficult? He's in really good shape. He had worked his way down the far shore until he came to the spit of land that marked the place where they had hidden the eagle, found it, and landed again, pulling down the bank a little in doing so, and bundled it in the wet cloak that he had carried, the cloak that had the brooch on it, the purple one, on his shoulder. Then he had returned the way he came as fast as might be, for the dun was thrumming like a disturbed bee's nest for the village. They were all like angry and fussing and trying to figure out where their eagle had gone, because it was really important to them. As we can see, of a certainty, the tribe was hosting. It had all been very easy, almost too easy. Eska's voice was growing blurred toward the close of the story. He was blind, weary, and the instant he had finished eating, he stretched out on the pile bracken, and sleep took him like a tired hound after a day's hunting. He hasn't really eaten or slept in like 3 days, so of course he's starving and exhausted. But before the sun was above the mountains next day, they were on their way once more, for though they were now clear of suspicion, it was no time for lingering. The village had shown no signs of surprise at Eska's sudden recovery. Presumably, when the devils were no longer in his belly, the man was whole again. They had given the travelers more of the eternal smoked meat, that's good, and a boy, a wild, dark-faced lad too young for the hosting and sulking in consequence, to guide them on the next stage of their journey, and bidden them good hunting and let them go. That day they had grueling traveling, the no-level loch side to follow, but a steep thrust northward into the heart of the mountains, and then east, so far as they could hold to any course, by narrow passes between sheer heather-washed crags of black rock, skirting wide mountain shoulders, traversing bare ridges across what seemed to be the roof of the world, until at last the lie of the country turned them south again into the long downward sweep that ended afar off in the marshes of the Cluta. Here the boy parted from them, refusing to share their camp for the night, and set off back the way he had come, tireless as a mountain buck among his native glens. They watched him go, easily, not hurrying, at the long, springing mountaineer's stride. He would walk like that much through the night and arrive home before dawn, not much tired. Marcus and Eska were both hillmen, but they could never have equaled that, not among these crags and passes. They turned their back on the last glimpse of Curachan and set off. I used to think that was the name of their god, but I guess it's the name of the area. Anyway, and set off southward, making for more sheltered country, for once again there was storm in the air. Not thunder this time, but wind and rain. Well, that would not much matter. Mist was the one thing that would matter, and at least an autumn gale would keep the autumn mists away. Only once before had weather meant as much to Marcus as it did now, on the morning of the attack at Isca Demnam Norium, when mizzle rain had kept the signal smoke from rising. Remember that? In the last flush of the evening, they came upon the ruins of a brooch, I don't know, one of those strange chambered towers built by a forgotten people, perched like a falcon's eyrie on the very edge of the world. They made camp there in company with the skeleton of a wolf picked bare by ravens. Thinking it best not to light a fire, they simply knee-hobbled the mares, gathered fern for bedding, and after filling the cooking pot at the mountain stream, which came leaping down through its own narrow gorge nearby, sat down with their backs to the crumbling stone of the entrance to eat leathery shavings of dried meat. What a picture. Marcus stretched out thankfully. It had been a grueling march. Most of the day they had to trudge and scramble, leading Vespania and Minna, so they can't ride their horses, over the steep mountain crags and stuff. And his lame leg was aching horribly, despite the ready help that he had had from Eska. It was good to rest. Before their feet, the land swept away southward over ridge after ridge into the blue distance, where, remember, a ridge is the top of, there's the valley and then the ridge. And a ridge can go long ways. And ridge after ridge into the blue distance, where 1,000 feet below and maybe 2 days' march away, the old frontier cut Valentia into the wilderness. Far below them, among dark ranks of pine trees, the northern arms of a great loch reflected back the flame of the sunset. And Marcus greeted it as a familiar friend, for he and Eska had followed its shores on their way north almost 2 months ago they came up. A straight journey now, no more sniping to and fro among sea lochs and mist-wrapped mountains, he thought, and yet there was a queer superstitious feeling in him that it had all been too easy. A queer foreboding of trouble to come. Foreshadowing. And the sunset seemed to echo his mood. He's like, it's just a little too easy. I'm worried. A most wonderful sunset, the whole western sky on fire, and high overhead torn off, hurrying wind clouds caught the light and became great wings of gold that changed, even while Marcus watched them, to fiery scarlet. Stronger and stronger grew the light until the west was a furnace banked with purple cloud, and the whole world seemed to glow. And the upreared shoulder of the mountain far across the loch burned crimson as spilled wine. The whole sunset was one great threat of coming tempest, wind and rain, and maybe something more. Suddenly it seemed to Marcus that the crimson of that distant mountain shoulder was not wine, but blood. Oh, more foreshadowing, I guess. He shook his shoulders impatiently, calling himself a fool. He was tired, so was Eska and the horses for that matter, and there was a storm on the way. That was all. A good thing that they had found shelter for the night. With any luck, it would have blown itself out by morning. It struck him that he had not so much as looked at the eagle. It had seemed better not to in the village that they had left that morning, but now it lay beside him, and on a swift impulse he picked up the bundle and began to unroll it. The dark folds of the cloak, as he turned them back, caught a more brilliant color from the sunset, warming from violet to imperial purple. The last fold fell away, and he was holding the eagle in his hands. Cold, heavy, battered, burning red gold in the sunset. Huga, he said softly, using the word he would have used to praise a victory in the arena, and looked up at Eska. It was good hunting, brother. Excuse me. But Eska's suddenly widened eyes were fixed on one corner of the cloak, the same cloak that had the brooch, okay, that he had wrapped the eagle up in. Where was I? One corner of the cloak outflung toward him, and he did not answer. And Marcus, following the direction of his gaze, saw that the cloth at the corner torn and ragged. The ring brooch, Eska said. The ring brooch. Still holding the eagle in the curve of his arm, Marcus was hastily flinging the folds this way and that, but he knew that it was useless. The brooch had been in that corner. With sudden, sharp-eyed vividness, now that it was too late, he remembered that scene by the loch side, the threatening faces of the tribesmen gathered round, the gear tumbled on the coarse grass, the cloak with its dangling brooch all but torn out of the cloth by their furious handling. Fool that he was, it had gone completely out of his mind. Out of Eska's, too, it seemed. It may have fallen at any time, even while you were in the water, he said. No, Eska said softly. It rang on the pebbles when I dropped the cloak before I dived for the eagle. He rubbed the back of one hand across his forehead, thinking back. When I picked up the cloak, it caught for an instant on an alder root. You know how the alders grow right down to the water's edge? I remember now, but at the time I scarcely noticed. He dropped his hand and they sat quite still, staring at each other. The ring brooch was a cheap bronze one, but its design was rather unusual, and the tribesmen must have often seen Demetrius of Alexandria wearing it. Also, to judge by the state of that jagged corner, there was probably a wisp of violet cloth caught in it to help their memories. So what he's saying is, he left evidence, okay? Before, it was fine. No one knew that they had stolen the eagle, but now there's a piece of violet cloth connected to a ring brooch that everyone saw Marcus wearing right by where they had hidden and stolen the eagle. So they were good. Now they're not. They have to hightail it out of there if they don't want to get killed. Marcus was first to break the silence. If they find it, they will know that one of us has been back since they searched our gear, and there could be but one reason for that. They stole the eagle. As he spoke, he began methodically to wrap up the eagle once more. So much for rest. When they speak with the warriors from the village we left this morning, they will know that it was I who went back, Eska said hurriedly and checked. No, that will not serve, for they will know that I went with your knowledge. Listen, Marcus, you must push on alone. If you take Hispania and go now, you may stand a chance. I will put myself in their way. I will tell them that we quarreled for possession of the eagle, we fought for it down yonder, and you went into the loch and the eagle with you. And Hispania? Marcus said, his hands still busy on the folds of the cloak. And what will they do with you when you have told them this story? Eska said very simply, they will kill me. I am sorry, but I do not think much of that plan, Marcus said. He's, Eska's ready to give up his life to protect Marcus, and Marcus is like, I'm sorry, but no. There is the eagle to be taken into account, Eska urged. Marcus made a quick, impatient gesture. The eagle will serve no useful purpose when we get it home. I know that well enough. So long as it does not fall into the tribesmen's hands to be a weapon against Rome, it will lie as worthily in a Caledonian bog at the bottom of the ocean, basically, or the bottom of a bog, as on a Roman scrap heap. If the worst comes to worst, we will find means to dispose of the eagle before they take us. It's like there's a good chance we're not making it out alive, but we can at least get rid of the eagle where they won't find it again. It seems strange that you have not cast a thing of so little worth into the loch before this. Why trouble to carry it south at all? Good question. Marcus was already drawing his legs under him, but he checked an instant, his gaze holding Eska's. For an idea, he said. He got up stiffly. We are in this together, and we will win clear together, or not at all. Either we're both going down, or both making it out. I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself for me. It may be days before that accursed brooch is found. They may not have found it yet. Nonetheless, the sooner we get down to Valentia, the better. Eska got up also, saying nothing. There was no more to be said, and he knew it. Marcus glanced up at the wild clouds, hurrying clouds like wind-driven birds. How long we have before the storm breaks? The others seemed to be smelling the weather. Long enough to get down to the loch side, anyway. There will be some shelter from the wind down there among the pine woods. We might make a few more miles tonight. That's the end of the chapter. Bye.